This video will show you why morals must come from God rather than any other source. And yes, that inevitably means we'll show why God must exist rather than not. Now, believe it or not, we're not necessarily trying to prove that God exists. We're simply going down a list of possible explanations for morality, looking through each of their claims, and seeing which one has the best evidence supporting them in an unbiased manner. So first we'll explain the surprising way morality works that 99% of people don't understand. Then we'll go through the 4 possible explanations for morality and why 3 of them fall horrendously short. And then we'll show how we know that God is the only possible explanation, which necessarily means that God must exist. So if you want to know how that's possible, make sure to watch to the end of the video. Let's get started. Morality is a code of conduct, a set of principles or laws that determine what people should or should not do. While some actions, like giving money to the poor or helping someone who's in need, are generally considered good moral acts, others, such as cheating at a card game or pushing a handicapped person down a flight of stairs, are clearly not okay. But where do these moral laws come from, and why do they exist? Well, one way to approach this is to look at other types of laws. For example, some cities and states have their own laws that come from the leaders and governors that issue them, and they exist to prevent bad behavior. If 2 cities or states disagree, which they often do, then the countries that govern them have the final word, telling them what laws they both have to adhere to. And this works in the opposite direction too. Neighborhoods have their own laws for what color they can paint their houses or what they can grow in their gardens, so long as the cities that govern them are okay with it. Parents of families set their own code of conduct for the rest of the household, and you can even go down to each individual person, who decides what they think is right or wrong for themselves. But is there something that tells all people how they should act, regardless of country, culture, or family? After all, some countries have laws that directly contradict others, such as cow slaughter being illegal in India, but more than allowed in America. And some governments can even enforce laws that are evil in and of themselves, such as the Nuremberg laws of Nazi Germany, which allowed Hitler to legally commit genocide. And this would even apply to people living on different planets and galaxies, if we ever got that far. There's no reason to think that Earthlings shouldn't kill people while Saturnians or Martians can. So how do we determine what's right when the highest levels of people disagree? And what is it that tells us that anybody's laws are evil, if ultimately there isn't anything that truly decides what's right and wrong? Is it even possible to know? Or is everything simply up to each group, region, and ultimately each person individually? Well, the only way we can know what's truly right for everybody is if there's something holding all countries and all people accountable, also known as a universally objective standard of morality. Here's why. Consider a pickup game of basketball. Since it's a casual game, the players decide to call their own fouls. But if one person says that some physical contact was a foul, and his opponent says that it wasn't a foul, how do we know who's right? Both players have equal say in the matter, and both people believe they're right, which means this is a subjective call. You can't say objectively what is right or wrong, unless an outside party, such as a referee, tells them what the right call is. Well, just as the players in the game can't determine what is or isn't a foul, people in real life can't determine what is moral or immoral. Any moral laws we try to appoint can be equally counteracted by anyone else's opinions, thoughts, and feelings. And if that's true, then who's to say which culture or country or groups of people at all have the right idea versus the wrong one? That's why we need an outside party that governs moral laws for them to truly be objective. Now, many experts say that these moral laws are appointed to us through the process of evolution. We inherently feel these urges and instincts so that our species can continue to reproduce, survive, and increase in strength for as long as we possibly can. Others say that all people just know what is moral and what isn't. We don't have to be told what's moral because we all feel it. It's natural to get angry at someone trying to steal your wallet, and it's natural to want justice when you're treated unfairly. If everyone knows what's right or wrong, then we don't need to question it. Still, others say that moral laws don't exist. Just like casual basketball players, we're free to decide what's right and wrong, and we can live our lives however we want. And yet, there is one last option, which is that universally objective morality does exist. There's something that tells all cities, countries, and ultimately all people anywhere what is right and wrong, and you can either follow that moral law or not. Some say the cause of morality is a hyper-advanced computer AI that's running the simulation we live in. Some might say it's a super intelligent alien race, but others simply call it God. We will now go through each explanation and determine which is the most likely, starting with. To reiterate this theory, some people say that humans have evolved to gain a sense of moral right and wrong because it helps our species survive. We are able to reproduce, expand, and live prosperously because these morals aid us in making the correct decision to better our lives. However, there are at least 3 major issues with this theory. The first is that many of evolution's principles directly contradict with the morality we have. For example, if humans want to strengthen their gene pool and increase their chances of survival, then it might be better not to allow people with weak genes to reproduce. Preventing any handicapped or autistic people from reproducing would invariably make us stronger as a species, as we wouldn't be held back by quote-unquote defective or faulty genes. Not only would our genes produce more powerful offspring, but we also wouldn't have to spend extra resources taking care of these people, and could instead use it towards other advancements. On top of that, anyone who can't produce offspring, or anyone who refuses to, should be eliminated along with them. In fact, not only do you see this happen in nature all the time, but this is also exactly what Nazi Germany thought as well. The Nazis believed that they needed to be pure in order to be strong, so they forcibly sterilized or killed people with physical and mental disabilities, as well as alcoholics or incorrigible criminals. But no decent person considers these actions morally good, so it doesn't make sense to say that our morals came from principles like survival of the fittest and natural selection. And the opposite is true as well. Many actions that people consider to be morally good are actions that lower your chance of survival. When the hero of a movie sacrifices themselves for a random person, people think that's great and honorable, even though it would be better for society if the powerful, smart, and capable hero survived instead. Now, to combat this, people will say that evolution may have started off doing things like weeding out the handicapped and the weak, but over time, it realized that keeping as many people alive as possible was more beneficial. So we evolved to want to do the things that may have initially seemed detrimental. At first glance, this might seem like a reasonable explanation, but ultimately no reputable evolutionists are willing to use this argument. This is because the very basis of evolution is the brutal and bloody process of killing to increase chances of survival, and suggesting that this produced the idea that we should not do those things is pretty contradictory. But just for fun, let's say that this explanation was possible. Well, this brings us to our second point, which is that since evolution is a process of change, morals also change with it. That means that morals are not universally objective, but rather subjective, as depending on factors such as genes, societal and cultural influences, geographical location, and time period, evolution can produce wildly different moral values. So the one thing that's supposed to explain where our universally objective morals come from ends up contradicting itself, as it produces moral laws and values that directly contradict each other. And yet, our third point is even more compelling. Keep in mind that, by definition, free will is needed to make moral choices. After all, something like a computer program can't choose to do something good or something bad, it just follows whatever programming it has been given without thinking. In fact, anything we don't have control over isn't our fault. If you're on the freeway and someone else makes a sudden turn and slams into you, the fact that this crash may also endanger other cars doesn't mean that you've done something morally wrong. As long as you've done all you can to drive safely, then you're not responsible for factors outside your control. The problem is, according to evolution, none of us have free will. If you haven't heard of that already, you don't have to take our word for it. Many of the world's smartest and most renowned scientists and scholars have already written books, articles, and published studies on this topic. They say that, just as a computer program has no choice to obey its code, humans have no choice but to obey their DNA. According to these people, nothing is really anyone's fault, and any feelings we have on the matter are just illusions. Getting upset at someone else's actions is nonsensical, it's irrelevant whether we lie to get promoted in our careers or earnestly work hard. There's nothing that we can do that has any meaning at all. We are just another species of animal, maybe slightly more advanced, but still slaves to basic survival instincts, as trillions of electrical signals tell us to do whatever it takes to survive on this insignificant speck in the universe. Real quick though, this channel does not actively discredit evolution as a whole, we're just saying that it doesn't do a good job of explaining where morality comes from. For further clarification, you'll have to wait for a future video we're working on, so make sure you don't miss that. With that said, let's move on to the next explanation. Some state that since we all generally agree on what the objective moral laws are, that we should just follow them without needing to know why they're there. After all, that's just how things are, and no one disagrees with it, so there's no point worrying about it. First of all, this is circular reasoning, which is a common logical fallacy, so it doesn't actually make sense. Second, the very same people that propose this explanation don't believe we should think this way about anything else in life. Nobody says, hey, we all know the moon exists, and nobody disagrees, so there's no use trying to figure out where it comes from. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Because we all know it exists, it compels us to learn more about it, how it works, where it comes from, and why it's there. This curiosity not only helps us make huge leaps forward in science and helps us better understand the universe we live in, but also staying willfully ignorant would just be utterly unscientific. And third, this is extremely worth looking into, maybe one of the most important things to look into in the entire universe. There are life-changing consequences, as the way that you live your life, the things that you stand for, and the way that you view the world depend on where the source of morality comes from. But even more than that, there are eternal consequences. If God really is the source of morality, then this 80-year life is only a blip compared to the trillions, quintillions, and octillions of years of potential joy and happiness. It's dire, crucial, and imperative that we try to find out if God exists, not just for this life, but for all of eternity. And honestly, that's all that really needs to be said about this one. There are many reputable scientists that agree that evolution fails to explain human morality. And of course, ignoring the problem makes no sense either. So at this point, there's only one last option for people trying to avoid turning to God, and that's just to say that objective morality doesn't exist at all. After all, nothing in our world can logically explain it, so it must not really exist. Oftentimes you'll hear this presented with statements such as, people should be free to decide the truth for themselves, meaning that whatever works for them and is making them happy is totally fine. Nothing is truly right or wrong, and in fact it would be ignorant of us to impose our thoughts and feelings upon others. Now, this is a phrase we wholeheartedly want to agree with, as that type of open-mindedness and inclusiveness is necessary to make meaningful progress during big philosophical discussions like this one. But if that line of thought is true, then nobody should be getting mad at other people for doing, well, basically anything. Did I just steal your wallet? Well, according to my beliefs, that's not wrong at all. Maybe I believe in survival of the fittest, maybe I believe in just doing whatever makes me happy, or maybe I believe that you're a bad person and that taking your wallet is punishment for doing bad things. Countries that don't allow women to vote or say that they're not as valuable as men aren't actually wrong, they just have different opinions. And if someone thinks sexual freedom is the most important thing to them, and thus goes and abuses or rapes whoever they choose, then that's the truth they've decided for themselves, and there's nothing anyone can say about it. If you believe that morality doesn't actually exist, then you can't say things like, hey, you can't do that, or people shouldn't do these things, or that's not fair. Because if you do say that, then what you're really saying is that no human should do these things regardless of their beliefs, which is exactly what universally objective morality is. Now, saying that heinous acts aren't objectively wrong is a pretty bold and uncomfortable statement that makes this view pretty antagonizing. So to soften it up, some people will say that while there isn't really objective universal morality, we're still allowed to disagree with each other. This allows them to say they dislike evil acts like murder, stealing, and abuse, just like everybody else, but they also still don't have to admit that morality is objective and universal. For this, we can look to things like our opinions on music, movies, or TV shows as a good example. Creative media and entertainment doesn't have any universally objective measure of truth. It's all just subjective, based on our own opinions. But yet, we disagree all the time. People even get pretty heated about artists and movies and the like. Can't this also be how morality works? The problem with this is that while people can quite fervently defend their opinions, nobody is saying that anyone who disagrees with them needs to go to prison. We're not lobbying or protesting that anyone who dislikes Star Wars has to pay a fine, or people who think that Parasite shouldn't have won Best Picture need to do time for 10 years. We might say that people who like vanilla ice cream more than chocolate have awful taste, but nothing is actually objectively wrong with liking vanilla. It's inherently understood that these subjective preferences are not that big of a deal. But of course, with tragic things like kidnapping and homicide, we do think these things are a big deal. In fact, you don't even have to do those acts to still be punished for them by law. For example, any action that intends to take money from a bank can result in years in prison, even if you don't actually take a single dollar. This shows just how differently people react to serious moral issues compared to subjective opinions. Lastly, the very people who believe that morality doesn't exist can't help but take strong moral stances themselves. One example of this is Richard Dawkins, an acclaimed evolutionary biologist and author at the University of Oxford. And whether you know of him or not, he has profoundly shaped modern beliefs on morality. Dawkins himself has said in his book, "We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes." This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment. But in that very same book, he also says, "Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish." So on one hand, Dawkins claims that morality doesn't actually exist in our world, but yet on the other hand, he's a strong advocate for morality at the very same time. Not only that, but he even gives his own version of the 10 Commandments for guiding moral behavior. He strongly proposes his own moral standards on all of humanity, which means that he believes in universally objective morality. And he's not the only one who does this. There are many examples of renowned scientists, scholars, and philosophers who say that there are no objective moral laws, but yet cannot help but act as if universally objective morality exists because it clearly does exist. So in the end, there is powerful and unavoidable empirical evidence that universally objective morality exists. It's something that we are all well aware of, something we all experience and see on a daily basis, and something we cannot ignore no matter how hard we try. So, the only option left is that a free-thinking being that exists outside the confines of our universe must have created moral laws and imbued us with the innate knowledge of them. At this point, you might be thinking, hold up, just because these other explanations don't work doesn't mean there couldn't be another explanation out there. But in reality, any explanation can only fall into three categories. 1. Morality is explained by natural causes inside our universe. 2. Morality is explained by causes outside our universe. Or 3. Morality doesn't exist. And I guess a fourth category would just be to ignore the problem entirely. Category 4 is clearly irresponsible and thoughtless, and Category 3 has all of humanity's empirical evidence going against it. For Category 1, you might think the only explanations we covered were evolution and sociocultural influences, but remember that to have an objective standard of morality, you need to have an outside party. So it's not just that these explanations can't explain objective morality, but any explanation that doesn't allow for an outside party can't explain objective morality. It just so happens that these two are the most common ways that people try to explain morality, so those were the two that we addressed. As for Category 2, consider the multitude of validity tests that it passes. It explains morality with high accuracy and precision, and even offers greater predictive power, because if God exists, then something like the Bible or another religious text can objectively tell us what else falls in line with our moral experience. It has never been proven false or found to have any contradictions. It explains not just one, but many aspects of morality, including where morals come from, why morals exist in the first place, why people across different regions and cultures still share similar moral instincts, and more. Whereas other hypotheses explain none. It's in line with other accepted beliefs and doesn't appeal to authority. While other theories suggest that the evidence for morality is just an illusion, Category 2 agrees that our experience is valid and that we inherently have fundamental ideas of right and wrong. It doesn't make assumptions or require extra unknown information. Over 55% of the world already believes in either Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, so a monotheistic God is not new information for the majority of the world's population. And finally, it fares better than other rival hypotheses, as all other theories either have glaring flaws or have just been completely discredited by contemporary wisdom. No other theory does as well as Category 2. So, although one might at first think God's existence is unbelievable, an unbiased, rational person looking at the evidence would have more reason to believe that God is the true cause of morality than anything else. Now, if you're a good and reasonable skeptic, you probably have one last issue with our argument. Okay, fine, you say. Maybe the source of morality does have to come from outside our universe, but how do you know that that source is God? Which is a great question. We don't know exactly what kind of God this is, but here are some of the attributes we do know about it. Our universe, by definition, is made up of space, time, and matter, but this being exists outside of our universe. That means that the being is spaceless, meaning that it's not confined to a limited amount of space. That means that the being is timeless, meaning that it doesn't exist within a limited amount of time. And that means that the being is immaterial, meaning that it doesn't consist of a limited amount of matter. We also know that this being is a free-thinking being, because as we stated before, creatures without free will cannot make moral choices. And lastly, this being has to have the ability to imbue all humans with an innate sense of morality deep within our souls. That means the being has the ability to alter all humans in some way and also control us to some degree. The being would need both incredible knowledge of how to do this and also incredible power to be able to do this. As we can safely say, no human here on Earth is anywhere close to being able to do that. Most people typically fall into one of two groups. Either they think it's impossible to know what's outside the universe since we can't go there and see for ourselves, or they think that anything could exist outside our universe since we can imagine any number of things. But as you can see, we can, in fact, glean insights and knowledge without actually having to go there. Similar to how early astronomers could figure out that the Earth orbited the sun without having to physically go into outer space. And you don't have to take our word for it. Take a look at this list of traits and think for yourself of things that fit this profile. What are some of the possibilities? Well, if you're tired and sleep deprived like us, don't worry, we did the work for you. This being can't be a floating piece of paper with moral laws written on it, because that would mean it's confined to a small amount of space and made up of a limited amount of matter. This being can't be an AI or even a universe-making machine, since those things do not have free will and therefore can't make moral choices. It also can't be multiple free-willed beings, unless they all agreed upon the exact same moral code. If even one of these beings had a different idea of ethics and morality from the rest, then their morality would naturally be subjective rather than universally objective. Therefore, it must be a single free-willed being with enough power to create and affect all beings across the entire universe. The only thing people know of that matches that description is a single, all-powerful deity, as usually described by a monotheistic religion. But does this prove that the Christian God is the one who created these moral laws? Not at all. There are multiple religions that give us a moral code and say that a single God exists. So then, how do we know which God is the correct God? And if it is the Christian God that's giving us this universally objective standard, then why does he seem to break his own moral code all the time? After all, hasn't he committed mass murder through the flood of Noah's Ark? Isn't hell the most unforgiving and unfair place that anyone could ever imagine? And if it's so obvious that morality is made by God, then why don't more people believe it? I mean, if there's so many people who think God doesn't exist, there has to be a good reason for that, right? We answer all of these questions and much, much more. So to make sure you don't miss out on all the answers of the universe, hit that subscribe button and the bell next to it. Thanks for watching, and God bless.